Welcome back for another edition of Soccer Files here on the Soccer Down Here Network. My name's Jason Longshore. Today's April 6th. It is a very special occasion in American soccer. It is a celebration of the launch of Major League Soccer, First Division League with more history than any other First Division League in American soccer history. What a lot of people don't know is that Atlanta has been tied to MLS from the very early days. It just took a long time before Atlanta became home to a Major League Soccer team in Atlanta United in 2017, announced in 2014. If you go back to the very beginning of MLS, Atlanta was mentioned as a potential site for one of the first teams in MLS history, and then mentioned many times after that. Wanted to take a look back at Atlanta's MLS history and all of the prehistory before Atlanta United on this momentous day in MLS history. MLS was originally set to kick off in April of 1995. And in early 1994, the United States was getting ready to host a World Cup. But alongside of that, you had Major League Soccer putting its plans together and putting the franchise bidding process together. The Atlanta Sports Council was leading that effort here in Atlanta, and Ross Bartow was the deputy executive director of the council at the time. He said, maybe we didn't get the World Cup here, but we made the decision that this league is something we want to be involved with. Atlanta was a bidding city for the 1994 World Cup, but there wasn't a suitable location at the time that it could be held in. Atlanta Fulton County Stadium, obviously busy with the Atlanta Braves in the summertime. The only other location was Grant Field, and it didn't pass the tests to get to that next step. I believe Grant Field at the time that the cities were determined was old school AstroTurf, and that would have had to be replaced with grass. Also, the same issues that Atlanta United ran into in 2017 playing there. The field is not the widest. They might have had to get creative to get World Cup games in there, and it didn't get very deep in the process of hosting World Cup matches in 94. So the Atlanta Sports Council didn't want to miss out on the next big soccer thing, which was seen as Major League Soccer launching. By February of 1994, there were three possible stadiums to choose from for Major League Soccer in the Atlanta area. Bobby Dodd Grant Field was one. That was going to take some work. DeKalb Memorial Stadium, which is now the James R. Halford Memorial Stadium in Clarkston, a DeKalb County Schools facility. That was another one. And there was a proposed 20,000-seat stadium to be built at Life University that never materialized. That proposed stadium was linked at different points to an MLS team, to the Atlanta Ruckus. I believe it might have been linked to the Atlanta Silverbacks after they changed over from the Ruckus. I'm not sure. It never happened. The speculation in February of 94 pointed to Coca-Cola being in Atlanta as a big reason why MLS would want to be in Atlanta. Alan Rothenberg was the president of the U.S. Soccer Federation at the time. He told Doug Kress of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the response from the Atlanta community has been terrific. It's been one of the quickest to respond positively. Atlanta just leaped right in there, and I'm sure Coke will want to be involved in an ongoing basis with Major League Soccer. In March, direct mailings went out seeking season ticket deposits. They went out across the country in a similar fashion. MLS's Atlanta office at that time was in the Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce building downtown. So meetings were being held in cities across the country as they tried to rally support for MLS. In Pittsburgh, the local representative told fans that Atlanta would be in the league because the Youth Soccer Association had bought 5,000 tickets and Coca-Cola had bought 5,000 tickets. This was reported by Steve Hedges on the North American Soccer email list at the time. Those pledges never materialized. Either they weren't true, or it was something that was said in Pittsburgh to try to drum up interest in Pittsburgh, saying, hey, better catch up because Atlanta's doing this. That didn't happen. 10,000 was the magic number that MLS was looking for from cities, and Atlanta did not have 10,000 pledged in March of 1994. On April 14th, the Atlanta Sports Council hosted an event. This was to drum up support for their efforts. Charlie Morgan, who was the head coach of the Atlanta Magic of the USISL, Debbie Hackman, the president of the Georgia State Soccer Association at this point, Ed Mooney was the vice chairman of the GSSA. They spoke to the assembled media about the potential for the franchise and the Atlanta soccer scene as a whole. Mooney was very involved in the bid for an Atlanta franchise, and he talked about the deadline for bids coming up in May. The decision for the initial franchises was expected in June. He spoke as well about DeKalb Memorial Stadium being their preferred site at that point. The bid committee met with Bill Sage from Major League Soccer, and they drew up a plan to expand seating to 20,000 from the current 15,000, removing the track to make a wider field and upgrading the press box and lighting. And if you've been to DeKalb Memorial Stadium, the press box, the lighting, could probably use some upgrades. Didn't happen, as we know. Doug Kress reported on some concern about Atlanta's chances coming from the league. This was in the AJC around this time. Bill Sage, the chief operating officer at the time of Major League Soccer, said, "I see a cohesiveness in Atlanta as a result of the Olympics. A lot of different elements that normally would go their separate ways are working together, and that's a positive sign. But it's clear the focus right now in Atlanta is the Olympics." And as we know, the Olympics took place in 1996, the same year that eventually MLS kicked off. Now, at this point, the plan was still for MLS to kick off in the summer of 1995. Now, I mentioned the 10,000 season ticket deposits or subscriptions, depending on what you want to call it. This is what MLS expected their bidding cities to do. Sell 10,000 of the deposits/subscriptions, identify an interim stadium, and again, this is in early 94. MLS bidding cities were expected to submit a plan to build a 30 to 35,000 seat soccer stadium. Now, Atlanta, to get to that deposit number, they plan to mail out more than 34,000 season ticket brochures using the Georgia State Soccer Association database. In May, 22 cities submitted bids for MLS franchises. Outside of Florida, Atlanta was the only southern city to submit a bid. Now, the World Cup came to the United States summer of 1994. We know Atlanta didn't host games. Tried with Bobby Dodd. Didn't work. The tournament did generate a lot of interest and attention in Atlanta's international community, who went to local bars, went to local restaurants. There was a lot of talk about these games drawing really big, caught a lot of people by surprise. The level of just basic soccer play in Atlanta was also being recognized at this point. Clint Mathis, you might have heard of him. He was named the Georgia High School Player of the Year. The Lovett School, their boys team, was named the NSCAA National Champion. Parkview was ranked at number 4. The Georgia State Soccer Association reported a 20% growth in registered players from 1989 to 1994. So everything's looking really good for soccer in Atlanta in the summer of 1994. As the announcement day for MLS loomed, hopes were pretty high in Atlanta. Ed Mooney told Doug Kress of the AJC, quote, "The door's open. I think the MLS really wants Atlanta. The question is whether we can give them what they want in time." Now, remember, DeKalb Memorial Stadium is what has been zeroed in on as the preferred facility. And the biggest question around that facility was concerning a $7.5 million renovation plan for the stadium. That project would not come up for approval before officials until later in June, and MLS didn't know if that was going to get passed or not. Frances Edwards was the chairwoman of the DeKalb County Board of Education at the time, and she said, "This whole thing sounds very exciting, of course. We'll be moving as expeditiously and cautiously as possible. We have a responsibility to the taxpayers, and we're not looking at anything that would require public funding. To us, the stadium is a facility just like a school, and we have to study this proposal very carefully." Now, there was another proposal in front of the school board to transform DeKalb Memorial Stadium into a world-class track and field facility in order to be used for training ahead of the 96 Olympics. Doyle Oren was the director of athletics and planning for DeKalb County, all in on the track proposal. She told the AJC, quote, "Soccer is growing in popularity, but it's difficult to say what kind of interest there is here for a professional franchise. It's tough to gauge. To tell the truth, the track and field would be less expensive, but we're looking at both." So June 15th, 1994, Major League Soccer made its first franchise announcements. Atlanta was not one of them. They announced 7 cities as opposed to the planned 12. The remaining 5 were due to be announced later in the year. Boston, Columbus, Ohio, Los Angeles, New Jersey, New York/Long Island, San Jose, and Washington were the cities that were awarded franchises. Now, you hear New Jersey, you hear New York, Long Island, it's like, what? Well, the New York, Long Island bid was later withdrawn, and the New Jersey bid ended up turning into the New York, New Jersey Metro Stars. So Atlanta's still in the running at this point. There's still 5 spots available at this point, according to the idea of having 12 teams to launch. But some of the issues with the bid were cited in the AJC when MLS made their announcement. Ticket deposits lagged behind other cities. The lack of a dedicated ownership group. You had the Atlanta Sports Council driving the bid. You didn't have a local owner driving the bid. Now, MLS was looking for investors that would have been investor/operators in their local market. Atlanta didn't have that. They had the Sports Council that was pushing for it, but no one else. That was an issue. Stadium issues obviously were a big one because, 1, DeKalb Memorial wasn't even a done deal yet, and 2, not everybody was sold on it working out as a Major League venue. Sage from Major League Soccer said, "Atlanta is a very viable option for us, but they have some problems. They have to work harder on the ticket sales, and they have to find a place to play. It's as simple as that." Ed Mooney told the AJC, "It's very difficult to sell tickets because we couldn't tell them where the team would play. Memorial Stadium was only proposed in May, so we've really only been at it about a month." Now, here's your comparison on the ticket sales. Columbus was the one who got to 10,000 first, and they were reported to have passed 11,000 by the time of the announcement. Atlanta didn't have 1,000 yet. Ed Mooney said, "My feeling is that we needed some more time, and we got it. We have no control over the stadium situation right now, so we're going to concentrate on the ticket sales. We're going to do some advertising, hold a phone-a-thon, and see if we can't get local businesses to sponsor each game." Now, the Associated Press at this time, which is kind of a weird juxtaposition because Atlanta's having problems selling tickets for a professional soccer team that they're trying to bring, but Atlanta drew the highest local rating for the first U.S. World Cup match against Switzerland. The interest was there. It just hadn't been capitalized on just yet. Now, when Atlanta missed out on the first round of announcements, Charlie Morgan of the Atlanta Magic and Ed Mooney traded some comments in the AJC. Morgan said, "Atlanta is a fickle sports town to a certain extent. There may be an initial interest, but unless MLS puts out a good product and goes out into the community, they may not get the support they need." Mooney said, "This could only help Charlie and the Magic. They would be like a feeder team for the franchise, like a farm team in baseball. To be realistic, the Magic has a small stadium, no marketing, and is a semi-pro team. The MLS franchise would be a first-class professional team." Morgan said, "It can only help the city if it's done correctly, but if it's done incorrectly, it can only be a hindrance. All they have is an idea and a way to go about it, but it's all they really have. It's hard to support something that's just a dream." The Atlanta Magic at this point were playing at the old Roswell High School facility that later, in 1997, was the home for the Atlanta Ruckus. They were playing outdoors in the USISL. They were more of an indoor team that was winning national championships, but to call them a semi-pro team is correct. So through the end of June and into July, new plans for DeKalb Memorial Stadium popped up. There was a big push to renovate the stadium into a 22,000-seat soccer and track stadium for the Olympics in '96. That facility would be used by the MLS team and by Olympic track teams. Now, I don't know how they were going to get the wider field in association with that. Maybe they were looking at a European-style track, which you do see in stadiums that can have a regulation FIFA soccer field inside of the track. Maybe they were looking at basically rebuilding the stadium. I don't know. Haven't found any more details on that, but that was where things had turned. So in July, the AJC ran a large feature article about the multiple leagues looking at adding teams in Atlanta, because there were multiple. MLS, we've talked about quite a bit up to this point. The Continental Indoor Soccer League was looking at coming to Atlanta and playing at the Omni. The American Professional Soccer League was looking at Atlanta as well. Now, they had tried to become the Division I league when the United States said, we have to do a Division I league. It's part of our World Cup bid. We're going to do it. There were bids to become the league. The APSL was one that had been around for a few years. They tried to become that. They didn't get that opportunity. So they had plans to compete with the MLS. So you've got a potential indoor team, a potential APSL team, and a potential MLS team. Of course, no coordination between any of that. The Atlanta Sports Council was also seeking local corporations to sponsor each of the 12 proposed home games for the inaugural MLS season. They were looking at, I guess, a 24-game season at this point. So in August, MLS made a big announcement. They were delaying the announcement of the remaining 5 franchises to later in the year. So there were 10 cities that were trying to get 5 teams. Atlanta's bid continued on. July 29th, the AJC reported that the season ticket subscriptions were around 1,600, so they had sold a little more than 600 since the last update. Bill Sage of MLS told Doug Kress, quote, "What I've told people in Atlanta is that I would not be optimistic. Right now, we're sitting here without a great deal of information about funding in Atlanta, and we have to assume there isn't any. It doesn't look promising." So by the end of October, as that delay continued on for MLS, it started to get out that they would delay their start to 1996. So Atlanta, still under consideration. The stadium issue is becoming a bigger and bigger issue because the planned renovations at DeKalb Memorial hit a snag. They never happened. There was not another location locked down. Bartow of the Atlanta Sports Council told the AJC, quote, "They want to be in Atlanta for all the reasons we know, but a place to play is a concern. In 1996, there's going to be a lot going on in town, and scheduling of facilities is also an issue in the league. We've put in a strong bid, but we can understand them saying that maybe it's not right at this time. It might be 1997 before Major League Soccer comes to Atlanta." Now, November 12th, Major League Soccer made their announcement that they would officially delay their first season until 1996. They also announced that they would launch with 10 teams, and they also announced that Atlanta was not going to be under consideration for one of those teams. We know ultimately they didn't go to 12. They went to 10 teams to start. Atlanta was pushed aside at this stage. So what happened alongside of all this? The APSL decided to come to Atlanta, launch a team for the 1995 season. Sam Chase, who was the owner of the Atlanta Magic, he was awarded that franchise in July. The idea was that the Magic would continue in the USISL, be a developmental squad for the APSL team, and things were starting to come together because the Ruckus were talking really big. They were linked to Bruce Murray, signed him in October. They were linked to other international players, Tajuddin Disu, who was a Nigerian youth international. They were linked to a lot of things. They came up with their name, the Ruckus, in November, and Mark Dillon, who was the general manager at the time, said, "We wanted a name we could own and a name that would not appear anywhere else in professional sports. We wanted a name that is unique." Well, that definitely qualified. Dillon also said, "We believe this reflects the action and the commotion around the team." Soccer America at the time reported that one of the names that had been under consideration was FC Atlanta. So the Ruckus were unveiled at a press conference in the International Sports Plaza of the Apparel Mart. And the slogan was, "There's a huge ruckus coming to Atlanta." Richard Groff, who was the commissioner of the APSL, said, "This team is the APSL's future. It's our future vision and our future model, and it will take us into a new and competitive era." Stadium for the Ruckus bounced around all over the place. They announced their plans originally to play at Life University's proposed stadium, which wasn't going to be 20,000 seats. It was now downsized to 8. That stadium obviously wasn't completed in time. They were linked to DeKalb Memorial at the time. Later, as the Atlanta Silverbacks, they did play at DeKalb Memorial. Eventually, they had to settle for Adams Stadium, another DeKalb County high school facility. So that gets us into 95. The Atlanta Ruckus side of it will branch off, and we'll talk about the Atlanta Ruckus at another point. But Atlanta wasn't completely out of the picture for joining MLS at some point in the near future. In an article in the AJC on October 13th, 1996, Wendy Parker wrote about MLS being interested in Atlanta, but not being able to find a place. Atlanta was one of 10 cities under consideration for 2 new franchises that would begin play in 1998. The idea was that the league would identify 4 finalists ahead of the MLS Cup final and then announce the winners by the end of 1996. So the problem, as usual, is stadium. Georgia Tech athletic officials told MLS they would not share Bobby Dodd Stadium with the soccer team. There was a very late push at this stage, and this is after the Olympics in 96, to try to save Atlanta Fulton County Stadium and have an MLS team play there. Ultimately did not happen. The Georgia Dome was not under consideration at this point. Bill Sage, who was now the senior vice president for operations at MLS, said, quote, "We clearly cannot be in a market where we don't have a stadium, but I wouldn't read into that a lack of interest in Atlanta." Now, Doug Logan, the commissioner, said, "I cannot tell you there was any great response from Atlanta. It was really passive about this bid for a team in 1998. The Georgia State Soccer Association, the Atlanta Sports Council, they were heavily involved in the 94 bid. They were not involved at this point. It's kind of unclear as to who was driving this, if anybody. Charlotte was in consideration at this point. Chicago appeared to be a lock at this stage, and this is mid-October in 96. Other possible finalists, according to Wendy Parker at the AJC, were Miami, St. Louis, Seattle, San Diego, Philadelphia, Cincinnati, and San Francisco, which might end up, if they didn't get an expansion team, getting San Jose moving to San Francisco. That didn't happen. MLS wanted to be in Atlanta. They couldn't get it sorted out. Ed Mooney, who had headed up the bid in 94, he said, "I think the MLS needs to be here to validate that it's a national league." Well, as we know, the 2 teams in 98 ended up becoming Chicago and Miami. Miami's an interesting one because on August 15th of 1997, Ken Horvitz, who was the owner of the Miami team, he was a cellular telephone magnate, according to Wendy Parker. And this is after the Atlanta Fulton County Stadium had been imploded on August 2nd of 97. Horvitz said that he was threatening to pull the team that he had already been awarded out of South Florida altogether. And he named Atlanta, Orlando, and Charlotte as possible destinations for launching in 1998, which is kind of wild. Didn't look likely again because they didn't have a place to play. But Orlando and Charlotte were mentioned. Orlando Citrus Bowl was mentioned, and what is now Bank of America Stadium, then Ericsson Stadium, was mentioned. And they were mentioned if they didn't get this relocation, which didn't happen. They sorted it out, and Miami ended up playing in Fort Lauderdale at Lockhart Stadium, that Charlotte was a potential location for expansion in 2000, which was the next scheduled expansion. That 2000 expansion was pushed back to 2001, and in April of 1999, there was an article in the AJC, again from Wendy Parker, that looked at a facility that was being worked on called the Atlanta Soccer Village. And Phil Woosnam, who was the former Atlanta Chiefs coach, player, North American Soccer League commissioner, lived in the Atlanta area. He was really trying to push this Atlanta Soccer Village idea that could have been in North Fulton County, could have been near Doraville, looked at one point at Stone Mountain. Woosnam wanted to bring an MLS team to the city and was really pushing hard. He was one of the leaders behind the Save Our Stadium push at Atlanta Fulton County Stadium. Rick Skirvin, who was the executive director of the GSSA in 1999, said, "There's a lot of momentum now. This has more real potential than anything we've ever seen in this state. There's such significant momentum that this is going to be a reality." Now, ultimately, it wasn't, but the Atlanta Soccer Village facility was going to have a 25,000-seat stadium that would have been the home for MLS. Parker wrote on the MLS front they were planning to expand by 2 more cities in 2001, and at that point, the frontrunners were Philadelphia and Houston. According to Parker, and this is, again, April of 99, the next wave of expansion after that could come as early as 2003, and Atlanta is one of at least 6 cities being looked at, along with San Diego, a second New York City team, Rochester, New York, Portland, Oregon, and Seattle. Christopher Pepe, who was an assistant to MLS Commissioner Doug Logan and specifically dealt with expansion matters, he said, "We see Atlanta as a sound market, one that has the demographics we're looking for. Whether it can support soccer like Philadelphia or Houston, for example, we can't say right now. But we're continuing to look into it." Woosnam had a ton of respect from the MLS front office. Pepe called Woosnam the heart and soul and driving force of the effort to get MLS in Atlanta. Okay. So that's April of 99. By May of 99, there was a proposal unveiled for this $100 million complex that could bring an MLS team to Atlanta. The location wasn't sorted out yet, but the idea, the huge part of it, now there were youth fields and there was a big complex, and the Georgia State Soccer Association would have been a big part of it. The major idea behind it was that it would bring MLS to Atlanta, and it would be the second soccer-specific stadium built in the United States after Columbus, Ohio. The Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce were involved. Phil Woosnam was involved. The Georgia State Soccer Association was involved. The centerpiece was a 25,000-seat stadium that was expandable to 40,000, and Atlanta Soccer Village officials were in Columbus for the launch of their stadium. MLS sent a representative to Atlanta for the announcement of the Atlanta Soccer Village. U.S. Soccer was also involved. And by this stage, the idea was, if this gets done, then you could see MLS in Atlanta by 2003. This is May of 99. The locations at this point were kind of all over the place. There were 5 sites that were being considered, 4 in DeKalb County, 1 in North Fulton. At this stage, the ideas in DeKalb were near the DeKalb Peachtree Airport, in the Peachtree Industrial Area outside of I-285, near the Indian Creek MARTA station, and in the Stone Mountain area. The North Fulton site was reportedly in the Georgia 400 corridor near Mansell Road. In June of 99, it became clear that there was potential for this site to end up at Stone Mountain Park and be in conjunction with a proposed training facility for the Atlanta Falcons, and would have been near the Olympic Tennis Center. The North Fulton site was off of Mansell Road, just south of North Point Mall. Now, ultimately, none of this happened, and that's a whole nother conversation about why that is. The Atlanta Soccer Village is something we'll dig into in Soccer Files down the road. In 1999 in November, and this was ahead of the MLS Cup match, Atlanta organizers were on hand in Foxborough, Massachusetts, to discuss their plans for the complex and their plans for the stadium, and were pushing with now Commissioner Don Garber, because Doug Logan had been replaced in mid-season. And Phil Woosnam said at this time, and this is again ahead of MLS Cup in 1999 in November, a year ago Atlanta wasn't even considered at all by the league. Now it's one of the leading cities if we can move forward in talking about the stadium. This was not going to happen for 2001. It was likely for 2003. Now, ultimately, we know that MLS, from the end of 99 to the end of the 2001 season, things were not going well. And they ultimately had to get out of Tampa Bay and get out of Miami and go from 12 teams to 10. Expansion was completely put on hold. So MLS in Atlanta pushed to the side completely. There were some different rumors that popped up occasionally here and there in 2006 and 2007 as MLS had started expanding again. It was 2008 that it got serious, and June 20th, 2008 was when Arthur Blank was linked to Major League Soccer for the first time in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. In 2009, late 2008, in October of 2008, a bid was placed by Arthur Blank and AMBSE, Arthur M. Blank Sports Entertainment, to bid for an MLS franchise. Now, in 2009, that bid was pulled back, and it was because of stadium issues, and ultimately because the idea was not to build a smaller stadium as things started to develop in a suburb, and Arthur wanted to wait and see what was going to happen with a stadium for the Falcons first. Now, we know what happened from there. It was discussions, ongoing, but 2013, it started to pick up some big momentum. 2014, the official announcement was made, but it's kind of wild to look back at 1996. The idea that was being put forth in front of Major League Soccer was MLS in 1996 in Atlanta playing at DeKalb Memorial Stadium. Not where you would think of MLS, but it was an idea to play in a smaller venue that they would have expanded to 20,000 seats, which is somewhere MLS ultimately went to for a while before going now to what Atlanta has ushered in, playing in bigger venues and selling more tickets. And it's kind of funny how things go round and round, huh? Ultimately, though, that first bid, you didn't have the owner driving it. Arthur Blank was not involved with the Atlanta Falcons at that point. Ted Turner owned the Atlanta Braves. You didn't see a local businessman pushing for MLS to come to town. It was the state association, it was the sports council saying Atlanta would be a great place for a team, but there was nobody to push it home, and that's why it didn't happen, and that's why it did happen in other cities. And in Atlanta, we had to watch MLS take place, and the closest venues we had at that time were in D.C. at RFK Stadium, and in Columbus, Ohio at Ohio Stadium, the Big Horseshoe. That was it. Took a while, but eventually Atlanta did get MLS and has pushed it into that next phase of the league's development. After the first 25 years, Atlanta, I think, is pushing into the next 25 in a big way and opening up a lot of eyes that this can be a league, as many have said around it, a league of choice, but also a league of immense growth. So it's very exciting to see where this can ultimately go. If you have any questions about this Soccer Files episode, shoot me a message on Twitter at Longshoe. Ask any questions, and we will get into it as we go. We'll dig a little bit deeper into some of the subplots here. The Atlanta Ruckus history. We'll dig into the Atlanta Soccer Village history. We will dig into the later run of MLS expansion and some of those links that ultimately led to Arthur Blank's interest. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you're enjoying this retrospective look back today across the board at the launch of Major League Soccer. Great feature that is about to come on MLS digital networks, and it'll be up, if you can't watch it live, of the first match with Jeff Agus and Eric Winalda, who played in that first match, talking about their experiences with it. Hope you enjoy this great look back at MLS today, and we'll be talking about it on Soccer Down here as we go this week. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being part of the SDH network. Talk to you soon.